Hi all, let's have a look at another amazing game from TCEC Season 20 Super Final. In round 66, we have a very interesting opening choice set for the engines to explore. After 1 e4, the rare bird move b6. So this is known as the Owen's defense, but it's also known as the Queen's Fianchetto defense, and also the Greek defense. Okay, so maybe some Greek grandmasters have been playing this. Also, you know, some British grandmasters like John Spillman on occasion has played this, or Basman. You know, these Fianchetto openings try and get the opponent to improvise in the opening away from all the opening theory they might have memorized sometimes or just learned and understood. It's off the beaten path. Downsides of b6, it's very interesting actually, a note that Wiki makes on this occasion about the downsides of b6 compared to g6, just from a theoretical perspective. It indicates that when you play this Fianchetto, it's harder to kind of use your king side, because your castle usually on the king side, to play f5 to exert more pressure. So it's, in a way, you're trying to maybe show the downsides of the opponent's position, but the downside of that plan is you can't actually add to that plan, make it more effective that easily. If you contrast that with g6, the modern defense, when we play the modern defense, and I often do this with black, I love playing later when they play d4, c5. So I think they do have a point. You're not weakening your king by playing c5, and that's a very entertaining game quite often I get in fast chess. So they do have a point that the Queen's Bishop Fianchetto, the early b6, it is difficult to build on that pressure of the Fianchetto. That's not to say the Fianchettos aren't popular in mainstream openings. If you look at the Queen's Indian, quite often there's a Fianchetto, but quite often also there's an option in Queen's Indian territory of Bishop a6 if White's committed to c4, trying to cause some hassle. So it's not always even with the idea of Bishop b7. So anyway, we see b6 here, and that's the end of the book of this game. So they're both on their own. So what does Leela play with all this neural network training experience here? Well, d4, the classic pawn duo, Bishop b7, Bishop d3. Now, f5 is an extremely risky move here. It's not worth looking at or even analysing. It's well documented as an extremely risky move. But there is one really, really entertaining idea if black goes for this. You know, the check, g6, f takes, knight takes, knight f6. And here white plays g takes, h7 check, knight takes, and then bishop g6. That is an entertaining little thing you can do against that. So yeah, f5 to build on that plan of pressure is not readily available. So we see e6, knight f3, and now Stockfish in its wisdom goes for d5 to maybe transpose it into a more closed position if white does play e5. There would be some hope, strategic hope I believe, for the black position. For example, black could play queen c8 and then try and exchange off these light square bishops to try and prove something about these squares as though white has overextended. If these bishops can be traded off, that would be a good strategical thing to do. And okay, white is still better with c4, can play dynamic c4. It's an interesting position anyway. So in the event though, Leela actually played e takes d5. Now, bishop takes d5 was played. E takes does lock in that bishop. It seems a bit silly to do this, e takes d5, from a positional point of view. And white's really up in development generally. If the bishop's just been developed just to be blocked in, it seems a bit silly. Okay, but after bishop takes d5, white gets this tempo, and now there's a constant kind of concern about d5. It's a constant insecurity of the black position. Quite often in Sicilian defense positions, black's often trying to put the brakes on white playing e5. Here it's d5. How does actually black put the brakes on white playing d5 at the right moment, which sometimes rips open the e file to give e file scrutiny, you know, pieces on e8 when you play d5. So this is a very dangerous lurking pawn break concern here in this position. And what is very, very interesting here is that Leela plays far from routinely here. Common advice given to beginners is, to castle early. This would be a terrible mistake here, to castle early. In fact, it's probably just, it's not totally bad. Bishop f3, queen f3 looks at the rook. But castling early loses, actually, some of the major dynamic perks that are associated with the d5 break, which could emerge if white plays a more caveman direct formation with the bishop here, the queen here, and the king on the queen side, because it does still mean that any king side attack could be built on, or augmented, like the Wiki article saying that, your advantage can't be augmented, the pressure can't be augmented, but it can be with that setup if there's an opposite side castling game. So this is a really interesting, delicate little decision here, knight c3, very far-sighted, not to routinely castle. After knight f6, we see another move. So the idea is to keep the options open here for castling queenside potentially. Keeping the options open is very, very nice here to do. We see knight bd7, so black's not in a rush with bishop e7 either. But if bishop e7 is played, bishop g5, and we get to see some of the horror. This is just a fictional continuation. There's some horror with d5 in this situation, because another aspect of this is not just the h-pawn, but this rook x-raying things like the d-file. So, for example, e takes, c takes is very, very dangerous for black. This is virtually a lost position already for black. If knight takes, bishop takes h7 check, bang, rook takes d5, and this is just crumbling. Check, and I'm winning the queen. There are horrible, horrible variations here, and it shows that this flexibility of castling queenside is really, really cool. If bishop d6 instead, then knight e4, d6, and black's getting blasted to smithereens again. So it's a very precarious position where knight bd7 is played instead of the natural bishop e7. You might think that's the natural bishop e7. So both sides are not playing in a sort of natural way, because there is great probability of being able to extend the existing pressures if played in such a way to keep those options open. So we see bishop c2 keeping these battery options and queenside castling options all open. We see bishop d6, bishop e3. This is also a very interesting decision, not trying to provoke any pawn moves from black, say bishop g5. It is possible that black could make use of g5 in castle queenside. That could be a slight relative downside of this bishop g5, although white still stands a little bit better. So this is, in a way, waiting for black to castle. Leela is a really cunning, superhuman intelligence, in a way, on the chessboard. So it does seem a little bit more keeping options open rather than committing to the bishop being on g3. So black does castle kingside here. Finally a commitment is made. Other options are not appealing. If knight g4, bishop g5, this with knight e5 is a huge amount of pressure after castling queenside. You can see that it's kind of nasty, this hook. Knight takes, d takes is a very nasty hook there. And this pressure after bishop e3 leaves black extremely in difficult territory after queen g4. And if dark square concessions are made, black's position actually doesn't last too long with best play. For example, like this could be a horrific example, getting mated on g7. So it's very, very interesting, yeah. So black castles kingside, and we see white castling queenside. The full horror of d5 and everything behind it is being revealed here. And we have this move which is almost giving up. If this is the lesser evil move, to give up the dark square bishop, followed by the light square bishop soon after, maybe, then this doesn't seem like a stable position for black to just volunteer the bishop pair. Ralston had the view that the bishop pair, you could be treated, personified, that they were once one piece because they look after each other. The light and dark squares looking after each other. But here we see Stockfish dramatically giving up one bishop after the other. Bishop takes c4 is played. It's little too late to go back here with bishop e7. For example, h4, just to see some of the horrors of this position with knight e5, queen d3, you can see that the h-pawn, and one of the real benefits, the real technical benefit of casting queenside, is shown that the default rook is made use of. Sometimes, this direct kind of caveman style is looked down on, but if it is celebrating default positions of pieces like the rook on h1, then what's not to like about this? For example, this smashes through very effectively. It is a super effective plan. So let's go back. So let's see. I mean, if h6, that's even worse on the light squares. If h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, and now, giving up the bishop is just, king b2 is a nice little move to take care of a3, and then black really hasn't got much counterplay. You don't need to give black any counterplay here, and white can actually turn attention to ripping open things or forcing a concession like a weak e6 pawn here. If f5 has to be played, white then targets, reorients to e6 with a huge advantage and a fantastic outpost on e5. So these are very, very dangerous scenarios indeed. So giving up the dark square bishop, and now after h6, bishop h4, Stockfish giving up the light square bishop. This is truly concession after concession is being given. And Leela actually takes with the g-pawn, which does, in theory, give a nice attacking road to the king. But even in endgames, the bishop pair, if intact, is going to be a dangerous force. If black hadn't given up the light square bishop, let's say a move like a6, then 95, you can see a huge amount of pressure on the black position. For example, here, white could build up with c5, and now f4, going in maybe sometimes for f5, but even just g4 here, and black's in a total bind. If you look at this position, it's a total and absolute bind, which is just going to end up losing material. For example, like this tactically, black will end up losing material. So very, very interesting that this other concession is now prompted. G takes f3 is chosen, king h8, king b2, rook g8, and now f4. So this promises the idea of dissolving the double pawn, so getting not just the benefit of this g road, but also the structural damage is repairable, potentially, and it is repaired, with f5. If black played a5 here, then again f5 and e takes, bishop takes. The two bishops are running rampant in this position. White could give up part of the bishop pair here to incur structural damage plus past d pawn. This will be a strong position for white as well, with a big advantage. A way to proceed, for example, like this, with a big advantage. Maybe winning f5 soon. So that's just an example. So let's go back. So f4, we see rook b8, f5, dissolving that. So getting multiple perks. Semi-open g-file, which, semi-open g-files can be ferocious one-way streets, not shared with the opponent. The opponent's just a victim, basically, on that semi-open g-file. So we can't share that g-file. Queen f3, queen f8. We see bishop g3, the knight protects c7, rook h e1, and it seems as though white's pretty quick now. After queen d3, black's pieces are getting tied up, knight f8 defending that mate threat. f4, rook takes, white is quick on this e-file soon. After f5, knight h7, queen e4. An infiltration point has been located, e7. This is an entry point on that supposedly shared file, but black is in no position to challenge this infiltration on e7. And this is with great effect now. Just getting the queens off leaves the black knights, struggling to defend key pawns here. We see c5. White is now aiming to dissolve the double pawns on this side of the board, or just replace them like this advantageously, where c6 could sometimes fix c7. We see rook d5, bishop f2, rook d2, a little bit of activity, a flurry of activity. h5, king b3, unpinning no. h4, pawns don't go backwards, that's fixed. c6. Now why c6? Because you might think, hold on, with c6, isn't this a concession? One day, if the bishop goes to a4 when the king moves, for example, like this, isn't this a major concession? Why play c6? So if king h7, c6 is played by white, and for example this with rook e7 is going to be pretty bad news. If it's black's really just tied up here, there are a lot of issues. For example, like this is just better for white. So let's go back. If king f8, by the way, c6, a6 is another example. Bishop c5 is pinning against the king, so the king can't really pop out here in this kind of endgame. It's a very dangerous endgame with the two bishops around. The king can't naturally go towards the centre. So we see this concession move, c6. It is a target that could come under fire. And with c4, white is invoking a plan to bring c6 under fire with king c3 now, not minding this rook g3 check possibility. Now bishop a4, knight a6, and we see that taking off, rook g3, and now king d2. You know, rook e3, black can consider rook takes g3 there. So king d2, rook takes. Okay, it looks as though, hold on a sec, hasn't Stockfish done something quite positive to create a passed pawn here? The bishops, the long-ranging bishops in the endgames are quite lethal. You can look at this bishop. With that long-range power, it can keep an eye on that queening square quite comfortably, as well as support white's own passed pawn. So this is a real struggle for black. So king c2, not minding a2, go h3. If rook takes a2 had been played for the record, if king b3, rook a5, c6, you can see that this is not particularly pleasant after bishop h2, c7. White is going to be forcibly winning material. So king c2, we see h3, and now king b2, rook a4, c6, rook takes c4. As another example of king h7, white could play rook e3, just picking up this pawn actually, for example, like that, big advantage. So c6, rook takes c4, we see bishop takes a6, rook takes, yes, this is just one material, it's over, bar the shouting. It's just one material, there's not too much counterplay here. Black could, in theory, just resign, I would say. It's close to resignation in position. So let's have a look what happened, though. So bishop takes a7, secures this very dangerous a-pawn now. And it's kind of all over, bar the shouting here. Black's pawns are far too slow and blockadable. Here, this is played g2, the both pawns are snapped off, and that's it. So black resigns here. So the Owen's defense, not the greatest advert for the Owen's defense, but the Owen's defense is really a good weapon in human chess, and maybe in human chess, in blitz chess in particular, or bullet chess, or even faster time controls, but not in the engine world. It seems in the engine world, the smallest concession in the opening can lead to bigger concessions, and we see dramatically in this game, you know, Stockfish having to give up both bishops for structural damage, which is largely repairable, and then those bishops are just running rampant in the endgame, stopping the king naturally coming to the centre and targeting pawns quite easily, and easily stopping the opponent's pawns being long-range pieces. So yeah, a very dramatic illustration of some of the more theoretical downsides of the Owen's defence put under great scrutiny at such a high level of engine chess. Okay, I hope you got something out of this. I enjoyed it anyway. I hope you did. And if you want to check out my tactics course, Kingscrusher TV / chess tactics has the bestseller label with it. It is actually a bestseller at Udemy right now, if you want to check that out. And there is a super discount code. If you put chess tactics -special, I'll put that in the pinned comment, you get even greater discount just for the next 2-3 days. So watch out for that. But after that, there's still a discount with Kingscrusher TV / chess tactics for the rest of the month. So I hope you check out my other courses on Udemy. I like the philosophical style of explaining things. You know, chess otherwise is a massive variations. It's nice to see what's going on at a higher level in my view. Hope you enjoy that. Okay. Comments, questions, like, share, subscribes, all welcome. Thanks very much.